Historians and scholars have noted that the story of Jesus appears to be a retelling of an earlier story told in Egypt. In the ancient religion of the Egyptians, their god was conceived by a virgin named Mary, who had the support of her husband, the child's stepfather, Seb. This Messiah was born inside of a cave. His birth was announced by an angel, and it was heralded by a star and even attended by a couple of important shepherds. He was baptized in a river. The person who baptized him wound up losing their head. He had 12 disciples. He performed miracles, exorcised a couple of demons, raised a person from the dead, and took a stroll across the water. The Egyptian god Horus is the one I'm talking about, and he was called the Holy Child, the ever-becoming Sun, the truth, the light, and the way. And his story was told thousands of years before the story of Jesus Christ. He did perform miracles. The hard truth is that Jesus and Horus do have a lot of similarities, but the Vatican has done their best through the centuries to make sure people don't know about them. Number 9. The Gregorian Egyptian Museum. In the year 1839, Pope Gregory XVI founded the Gregorian Egyptian Museum. The museum consists of 9 rooms filled to the brim with ancient Egyptian artifacts, most of which had once been held in the private apartment of Pope Pius IV. As you may already know, Romans were absolute fiends when it came to Egyptian anything. The major importation of relics from Egypt began around the year 31 BC, after the Battle of Actium. The Roman Emperor Augustus defeated Mark Antony and his consort, Queen Cleopatra, and rich Romans drowned themselves in the spoils of war. These spoils would go on to fill the rooms of the Vatican with treasure. That means they were stolen from a foreign country by a greater power, and they are still being used to make the Vatican money, far from the Egyptian people whom they technically belong to. Number 8. The Vatican Obelisk. You can't actually visit Vatican City without coming across the huge monument from ancient Egypt sitting in the center of St. Peter's Square, quite literally at the heart of Vatican City. They don't realize that this stolen piece of Egyptian history is not only kept prisoner by the Vatican, but has also been defaced by the Christian cross affixed to its top. That part wasn't there when the Egyptians first built the thing. They didn't consider it stealing back in the year 37 AD. The famous Roman Emperor Caligula took the obelisk from Egypt as a prize and brought it to Rome, and it wasn't the only one. There are approximately 13 obelisks standing through the city. There are more Egyptian obelisks in Rome than there are in Egypt. The one in Vatican City has no hieroglyphs on it, and so we don't have any information about which pharaoh ordered its construction. Number 7. The Forbidden Teachings of Jesus. The oldest known copy of a mysterious text detailing the teachings of Jesus Christ is not hiding in the Vatican. This ancient piece of Christian history was actually discovered in an Egyptian trash dump. This is a very rare religious manuscript written in the Greek language. It's a piece from a story that was never included in the Bible, called The First Apocalypse of James. If you've ever heard of the lost or forbidden books of the Bible, this is one of them. Instead of being one of the biblical stories written over 3,000 years ago, this one was very likely only written about 1,500 years ago. The Vatican, or the Roman Catholic Church in general, does not consider it to be any kind of religious scripture. Still, it is a hugely important religious text. The manuscript was written in Greek because in the days of the Romans, Greek was universal. It was the English of 2,000 years ago. Brent also says the manuscript was probably used as a teaching device because of the way each line is separated by small dots and because of how the syllables are all divided. It looks like a tool that would have been used by a teacher to help students learn how to read and write Greek. This would have been a major issue because at the time the Catholic Church had forbidden this text. Book describes the world as a prison created by an evil god, a kind of first-century version of the Matrix. Number 6. Fake mummies. There are 2 mummies being kept by the Vatican. According to the Smithsonian Institution, these mummies are fakes. This rather peculiar discovery came to light when researchers were studying the collection of mummies at the Vatican. They were both under 2 feet, 0.6 meters long, and supposedly held either the remains of mummified children or ancient mummified falcons. When the researchers tested the DNA of the bones, they discovered them to be from a man and a woman who lived in the Middle Ages. In other words, these were people from no more than 500 years ago, who most likely had their bodies stolen from their graves. Then they were wrapped in fake mummy wrappings. Number 5. The remains of Alexander the Great. The Catholic Church, aka the leaders of the Vatican, might actually be hiding the remains of one of the most legendary men in history. There is a theory out there that says Alexander the Great's body is being kept a secret by the Vatican, and they don't want anyone else to get a hold of his bones. This theory says that after Alexander's death in 323 BC, he was buried somewhere in a tomb in Alexandria, Egypt. After his burial, a Venetian merchant stole his corpse and transferred it to Italy. The corpse was then misidentified as Saint Mark the Evangelist and buried in St. Mark's Basilica. If these people are to be believed, it's actually Alexander the Great's body at the Basilica, not St. Mark. It would explain why Alexander's tomb has never been found, even though people have been searching for it for thousands of years. Number 4. The knowledge of Alexandria. In the 3rd century BC, the Great Library of Alexandria was supposedly the biggest repository for knowledge in the ancient world. It was a center for learning where scholars from all over the known world came to be enlightened and to study. The library supposedly opened during the reign of Ptolemy I after Alexander the Great died. The primary function of the library was to gather together every piece of knowledge on Earth to form the ultimate depot of human wisdom. Unfortunately, the library was destroyed about 2,000 years ago. We still don't really know why, only that the Library of Alexandria was completely gone by the year 400 AD. Then it was burned by the Muslims. There's another theory that says it was actually the Christians who destroyed the library because it went against their beliefs. Some believe that other pagans destroyed this famous library. Between 48 and 47 BC, Julius Caesar was entangled in a civil war. Ancient sources say he actually set fire to his own ships, and that the fire spread to shore, destroying the library and everything close to it. There actually isn't any archaeological evidence showing a huge library in Alexandria. There are some ancient remains, but they only would have been able to hold about 70,000 books. Researchers say there's no way the library had contained even a small portion of all the world's texts. Number 3. The Pyramid in Rome. The Pyramid of Cestius is the only pyramid in Rome. It's not technically in Vatican City, but it does have a pretty similar history to the Vatican obelisk. The Romans didn't pick the pyramid up and bring it with them, but instead stole the Egyptian style. In the year 30 BC, the Roman Empire absolutely decimated Egypt. Within a couple of years, the Romans were helplessly obsessed with everything Egyptian, and in 18 BC, the Pyramid of Cestius began construction. It took only a year for the Romans to build it, as a burial monument for a man named Gaius Cestius Epulo. He was a praetor, meaning he was extremely important, and the tomb pyramid was way smaller than he'd wanted it to be. During this particular time in Roman history, there was a very specific law which regulated gratuitous displays of wealth. People couldn't hold feasts that were too big, they couldn't wear clothing that was too luxurious, and they couldn't build giant pyramids that overshadowed all the other buildings in the city. There was once a bigger pyramid in Rome called the Pyramid of Romulus, and it stood between the Vatican and the Mausoleum of Hadrian. However, Pope Alexander VI ordered the ancient pyramid to be demolished in the 16th century, then used its broken pieces to help build the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. Number 2. The greatest treasures. The Great Egyptian Museum at the Vatican is home to some of the most bizarre and most important artifacts in the world. For example, there's the statue of Anubis, the Egyptian god of mummification, decorated in a Roman toga. This fine marble statue comes from the 1st century AD, a time when the Romans had started adopting many of the Egyptian gods. In one hand, he holds an Egyptian musical instrument called a sistrum, and in the other holds the caduceus of Hermes, which the god Hermes used to guide souls in both Greek and Roman mythology. Number 1. Mummifying saints. We know that underneath the Vatican is the preserved corpse of John the 23rd, who looks just as good as he did when he died in 1963. He's entombed in a glass coffin, and doesn't look a day over 100. Its preservation was inspired by the ancient Egypt mummification process. Between 1975 and 2008, a team of elite Vatican embalmers preserved approximately 31 saints and important servants of God. It's all part of the Catholic belief that says if a body doesn't decay after death, the person is indisputably holy. The Vatican has a poor history of trying to mummify their corpses. When Pope Pius XII died in 1958, the Vatican tried to preserve him in the same way that Jesus was preserved after he died, using a kind of mummy wrapping. They wrapped him up, but it was a huge failure. And still, all these years later, the Vatican is attempting to mummify anyone of great importance.